Do you see Europe separating from US? US is the leader. There's no
Hmm.
question. Europe doesn't have a choice here.
Welcome to the gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Our focus is on Ukraine, and it's over 700 days since Russia's invasion. And I have with me Nandan Unnikrishnan, head of the Russia Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation. Nandan, glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Nandan, we've had reports that the US Secretary of State Blinken says Ukraine will be admitted into NATO. There are no dates, it's not clear when this could happen, but there is a NATO summit sometime in July. What is your sense?
Well, Ukraine is definitely not getting into NATO this year. My personal feeling is that if rational logic prevails, Ukraine is not going to get into NATO ever. It may have security arrangements at a bilateral level with the United States and maybe some other European countries, may even get security guarantees from them, but it is not going to be formally a member of NATO. That is my sense. But this war has generally what's happening in international relations has upturned a lot of rational prognostication.
Yeah.
So anything is possible, but I don't think it's going to happen this year. Not because NATO is, I mean, one is NATO may be reluctant, but also I don't think they're going to rock the boat prior to the US election.
Mhm. Do you see this as part of, I mean, there are reports referring to Trump proofing, given that President Trump, if he is elected, has indicated he may not be interested in going ahead with this war in Ukraine. Do you see this whole talk about NATO and the higher profile Europe has acquired in this war? Do you see it as kind of providing insurance in the event Trump comes in and pulls back?
Do you see Europe separating from US? US is the leader. There's no
Hmm.
question. Europe doesn't have a choice here. So Europe is not going to take charge of the war in Ukraine. The US is not going to allow it. And if NATO takes charge of the war in Ukraine, then the US is going to decide how it is going to be conducted. So I think all this is futile. But yes, there is a move by Stoltenberg, the long standing chief of NATO. He has proposed creating a 100 billion fund, which would be dispersed to Ukraine over a period of 5 years. This, in a sense, could probably qualify as some kind of Trump proofing, because even if, like right now, money gets stuck in the US Congress, then this fund, if it's created, uh, theoretically could continue to fund Ukraine. But as I said, the United States is the leader of the coalition that is supporting Ukraine, and if United States is willing to fight for its hegemony across the globe, I'm sure it will fight for it in Europe too.
Hmm. Then why all this noise about Europe? I mean, what's is this about the U.S.? I mean, the U.S. trying to distance itself. What is it about?
No, no, I don't think the US is trying to distance itself. There is genuine look all over the world, whether it is Europe, Russia, China, India for that matter. Everyone is worried about the possibility of Trump's second coming. It is not that they expect any kind of major change in US policy, because ultimately US national interests are going to not going to change. But it is the fact that Trump is rather unpredictable. He, in his wake comes a lot of chaos, and that is something that nobody wants to deal with. As it is, there is enough chaos in the world currently. So adding the Trump factor into it is something that, of course, many people are reluctant. And even the Russians, for example, who would, in theory, prefer Trump because he is sort of pessimistic on Ukraine. But even the Russians don't want an unpredictable Trump in the White House because, then their calculations all could go awry. So I don't think this is any kind of US withdrawing or anything of that sort. It's just that there is a lot of confusion about what US politics. In fact, for the first time, US politics, domestic politics, have become an incredible variable in international affairs. I mean, they were always important, but this time it's super important if you want.
Mhm. Putin has already spoken of, kind of indirect thing against Ukraine. Sorry, against NATO. There's already a proxy war going on, and the way things are moving, if NATO's profile gets even higher, we don't know yet whether the Western boots on the ground will ever happen. But do you see NATO's profile going higher in this war?
You know, Surya, this is a difficult question for the simple reason that, again, rational analysis suggests that NATO does not want to put boots on the ground because now the next step is boots on the ground. The F
Yeah.
16 are soon going to arrive. So, beyond this, how much can you give weaponry? I mean, short of nuclear weapons, what else can you give now?
Yeah.
So, that is that. And without Western support, Ukraine will collapse. That is also clear. Now, the question is Europe and the United States, primarily the United States, has to decide what is the argument to continue the war in Ukraine. I mean, after the US election, do you settle for some kind of, ugly sort of peace in Ukraine where the Russians and the Ukrainians keep sort of low intensity warfare going on? But essentially, the conflict is over from its hot stage, as it were. Uh, I mean, it's very difficult to predict. I personally think that it will sort of coalesce into something like that. Although there are optimists who believe that there will be negotiations and there will be some kind of rearrangement of European security, taking into account some element of Russian interests. In other words, Russia may not concede any territory in Ukraine. In fact, it will keep what it's already got, and the rump Ukrainian state will be sort of brought back to life by Europe and the United States. But I'm
Yes.
pessimistic about that scenario.
You mentioned something about both sides kind of settling roughly along where they are now. Are we looking at some kind of a line of control kind of situation?
I would think so. I mean, you see, firstly, I don't think anything is going to change in terms of warfare. It's going to be continuing war at this level of intensity at least till the US election. Once the election is over, then the United States will have time to think about what it wants next step. Right now, no decision can be taken. In that time, I have a suspicion that given that the initiative of the war currently is in Russian hands, that Russia may move and occupy some of the territories that still are theoretically part of Russia because Russia has incorporated four districts or what they call oblasts of
Yeah.
Ukraine, but hasn't reached the administrative boundaries of those four districts, right? So there is about 5 to 10% of territory to be taken to claim that all of Russian territory is now within Russia. So I suspect the Russians will, that will be the minimum program for the Russians in the coming year. After that, of course, a lot will depend on what happens in the United States, whether the United States decides that it's time to talk, or whether they decide that it's time to continue bleeding Russia and that this could lead to regime change. Putin, after all, is hated beyond hate in Washington.
And you mentioned this briefly. Your assessment of the war situation, how it's seen from Moscow.
Moscow believes that the worst is over, that the initiative in the war is in their hands. But they are not, they're also realistic enough to understand that the Ukrainians are still strong. They have a lot of weaponry. They still have people. I mean, they're not totally run out of people, even though uh, their armed forces are spread a little thin. So they're not going to sort of throw everything into some kind of uh, offensive. They are going to slowly sort of, try and grab little by little territory. And program minimum would be to get to the administrative boundaries of the territories that they have incorporated. Beyond that, depending on the capability of Ukraine to defend itself, anything is possible. I mean, if I was a military man, I don't know. I'm not a military man, thank God. But if I was a military man, I would think that one of the things that Russia would want to do is to cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea completely. Uh, you know, but would they have the capacity to go and take Odessa? I doubt it.
Mhm. The Ukrainians appear to be striking deep within Russia. I mean, how do you explain this?
Well, you know, the point is Ukrainians have a lot of support from the West. And what has made a critical difference in this war is the satellite real time information that the Western countries are providing Ukrainian forces. So, Ukraine is aware of the movements of Russian troops, of Russian missiles, literally real time, right? And this is an advantage Ukraine has over Russia. Russia's satellite imagery is clearly not at the same level as, or coverage is not at the same level as the Western countries have. Uh, so that is one aspect that Ukraine has an advantage over. But otherwise, I think Russians have taken the initiative. They have withstood the Ukrainian offensive. And I don't think Ukraine now has the capacity, even with an influx of new, fresh arms, has the capacity because of lack of manpower to launch another fresh offensive. Because when you launch an offensive, you have to have at least a 3-to-1 ratio to be able to uh, sort of even hope for success. And I don't think that is achievable in the current circumstances within Ukraine. So we are in for a messy situation. There will be loss of life. It is unfortunate and tragic. Ukraine is going to lose even more people. So will Russia, of course. But at the end of the day, I think if you put everything on the scale, as of today, the Russians would probably be the happier lot.
Mhm. A lot of new technologies like UAVs and stuff being used. Although long range artillery still remains a huge deterrent. But do you see this war moving more and more towards the technological, edge?
There has been actually, if you remember, in Nagorno Karabakh, the Azeris were the first who really
Yeah,
showed us the possibilities of drones.
yeah,
They completely decimated Armenian resistance with the use of drones, and conventional ballistic air defenses or conventional air defenses were unable to cope. Uh, what we are seeing in this particular war is a scaled up version of it. Initially, the Russians were losing because, particularly in 2022, because they were unable to deal with the drone attacks at the front level, including the Turkish drones that were supplied to Ukraine. But subsequently, they developed their responses. They also developed their own drones, some apparently purchased from Iran, but also
yeah.
produced within Russia. And now they are also equally adept at using drones. So both sides, in that sense, have equalized and both use drones to devastating effect. On the Ukrainian side, the positive is that I don't know this for a fact, but reports suggest that the Black Sea fleet has moved out of Sevastopol because of the success of Ukraine using drones, air drones as well as underwater drones, in inflicting damage on the Russian ships of the Black Sea Fleet, which is a major success. Ukrainians also have had some relatively modest success in attacking air bases as well as some energy units deep within Russia. A couple of days ago, we had a report that they were hit a refinery in Tatarstan, a refinery that produces 6 to 8% of Russia's output of gasoline, petrol, diesel, and all that kind of thing. So, obviously, Ukraine is learning how to use drones and has uh, potential threat on its hand. Although in this particular case, it's not going to change the nature of the war in terms of the initiative will still be with the Russians on the ground, but there are certain painful blows they'll have to take. On the other hand, the Russians are very effectively using their drones and missiles to attack deep within Ukrainian territory, damage their economic infrastructure, attack their production plants, attack their energy units. Recently, I think they also demolished some electrical substations. So, areas in Kharkov and other parts of the country were facing problems of electricity supply. So both sides are learning fast on how to use drones and how to conduct warfare at a distance, if you want.
Mhm. In the first year of the war, the Russians suffered tremendous losses, and but they appear to have scaled up very quickly. Whether in the use of drones, as you mentioned, even their defense industrial base has kind of reworked itself, restructured, or whatever, and scaled up. How do you explain
Absolutely.
this?
I think when the Russians went in 22, uh, it was an operation that was predicated on a quick capture of main airfields near Kyiv, kept by the Marines, taking over those airfields and then taking over Kyiv itself and hoping that the Ukrainian regime would surrender. That did not happen. And they went in with clearly a very small force for an operation or conducting a war against a country like Ukraine because they believed that victory was going to be quick. When the Ukrainians resisted and the move to capture the airfields near Kiev failed, the Russians then sort of understood that they would face major losses. And I must say that they were able to readapt and organize a retreat in which the human losses weren't great, but subsequently, they showed this retreat as something that was done because of talks in Istanbul. But I think it is the other way around. I think the Ukrainians inflicted damage, and the Russians realized that they will lose even more if they persist in trying to retain the territory they had captured early on. But subsequently, you're right, absolutely right. The Russians realized the importance. They realized the importance of the military-industrial complex. They were able to restructure, and today their production of even things like 155 shells outpaces what the combined West is capable of producing. Uh, of course, the combined West, if it puts its mind to it, will, in a period of time, be able to
Prevail.
produce much more. But the point is, it is going to take them a couple of years to ramp up, whereas the Russians have managed to do this within the year. Within the year, what is interesting is actually something else to me. Till about April or May 23, the Ukrainians actually had an advantage both in terms of manpower and equipment. And why they delayed their offensive till June, till the Russians were able to consolidate and build the so called Surovkin line and all that stuff, is incomprehensible to me because if they've launched their offensive earlier, I understand winter and mud and all those problems. But if they launched their offensive earlier, I think the Russians would have been in deep, deep trouble. But subsequently, when they launched it in June, I mean, I think they managed to reach the Surovkin line only in one place. I mean, shows
Yeah.
how futile their attempts were. And it is just a matter of maybe a few weeks uh, that the Russians were preparing for a long time. but they were able to consolidate and hold their lines at. And it is important here that they got support from their military industrial complex, which provided them with the necessary amount of arms. So they got the necessary shells, they got the missiles, they got their tanks, they got just about everything.
And would you say the Russian general staff, their thinking on how to carry forward this war has changed, adapted as they face reverses on the field?
Absolutely. They have completely changed what they originally thought. Well, I mean, the original plan of, quick capture of Kiev and regime change. That whole plan has changed considerably. They have recognized the nature of the war. They've recognized that this is going to be a war of attrition. This is not going to be some, you know, cruise missiles flying all around the place, some futuristic Star Wars or something. That this is back to the drawing board of probably parts of World War II, parts of World War One, and the Russians are good at it. They have proven that in the past. So they
Yeah.
sort of, clenched their teeth, tightened their belt, and got down to business, as it were.
And there's no real agitation, any public disaffection with the war.
Right now, if you go to Moscow, you don't feel the war, except these big posters and you see it on television. But the war itself is not felt in the sense restaurants are full, shops are full. Incidentally, the same you can say about Kiev. Huh? Kiev also restaurants are full despite occasional bombings.
Mhm.
So the population does not feel the war. The population is not feeling any great loss in standards of living. uh, you don't have Western luxury goods, but you have everything else that is required. So I may not be able to buy a Mercedes, so I buy a Chinese car instead.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But I have a car. So right now the disaffection would be very low. Uh,
Mhm.
Also, something again that we all need to recognize. A large portion of the Russian population agrees with Putin that parts of Ukraine are Russian,
Yes.
if not whole of Ukraine. At least parts of it is historic Russian land.
Mhm.
So, there is, if not outright support, but there is sympathy with what Putin is trying to do. So, a majority of the population is not hostile to it. But what is a problem is that Russians are per se have a negative attitude to war and violence,
Yeah.
having gone through World War II. So if this
Yeah.
continues, let's say for another year and a half, then attitudes may change. We'll have to see.
Um, just stepping back from all this, we had the Ukraine foreign minister in Delhi last week. What is your sense of our outreach there? What are we trying to do?
Well, India is trying to show that it's a friend to all Vishwamitra. So
Mhm.
we are balancing, we are meeting everyone, we are talking to everybody. So essentially trying to project ourselves as a great power. But if you look at the substance of the chat that the Ukrainian foreign minister had with our people, nothing significant has changed. It's not that we are changing our position on Russia. It's not that we've promised to do something dramatic for them, to start supplying them with arms or something like that. I have a suspicion that the Ukrainians weren't too keen to come to India. I think they were
Mhm.
prodded by their friends in Washington. I think neither were we too keen to receive him. We were also prodded by our friends in
Mm.
Washington. So both sides have need to not irritate Washington. So we went through with the process, you know.
Mhm.
So that is where it is. But yes, the fact is that the Russians would not be very happy with what we are doing. And to
Yeah.
that extent, I think it's a good thing that India is reaching out, trying to show that it has got a balanced approach, that it is not approving of what Russia is doing in Ukraine, whatever else it may think in terms of whether there are some provocations or not That is a different matter. But the point is, India, as Prime Minister Modi said, this is not an era of war, right? The second thing I would like to point out with Kuleba's visit is that he really did not get any serious level of meetings. I mean, he couldn't meet the Prime Minister. That was, of course, out of the question. But he did not even meet the National Security Advisor. He essentially, his meetings were restricted to the Foreign Office and maybe a few intellectuals. I don't know. I wasn't one of them who met him.
Hmm. So no, some of this buzz about an Indian role and perhaps trying to broker a peace and all that would be a lot of hot air, or
I genuinely don't know, but I think India should not venture into those waters. There are many underwater stones there, which we may not be aware of.
yeah.
And, like the Titanic, if we venture there, we might
Hmm.
hit something and live to regret it. So I think India would be wise to offer whatever it can in terms of facilitating uh, an end to this war, facilitating a discussion between various countries. But I don't think we have the necessary leverage with either the Russians, either the Ukrainians, or the United States to be able to play a genuinely mediatory role.
On that note, Nandan, thanks very much. And let's see going forward what shape this war takes and what we do. Thank you very much.
Everything I said could be wrong, but we are in a world where predicting anything is very, very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks,
Thank you
Nandan.
for
Thanks very much.
inviting. Yeah, thank you.
Great to have you. That's all we have for you on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. Thank you very much.